April 16, 1959. A record executive in New York holds a master tape. The voice on it has been dead for 67 days. There's no will, no instructions, no approved track list. Just a widow who can't listen to the recordings, a producer in Texas who won't let go of the masters, and a label that needs product now. Somewhere in that collision, an album takes shape. One the artist never assembled, never approved, never imagined. This isn't the story of how Buddy Holly made his self-titled album. It's the story of how his self-titled album made itself. From grief, legal warfare, and the one truth the music industry never speaks out loud. Death is good for business. February 2nd, 1959. One day before the crash. Buddy Holly is on a freezing tour bus somewhere in Wisconsin, sick with the flu, wearing the same clothes for the fourth straight day. The heater's broken. Again. His bassist has frostbite forming on his feet. Holly makes a decision. Charter a plane. Get ahead of the tour. Sleep in a real bed. Do laundry. $8 a seat. That decision will kill him in 14 hours. But the pressure that forced him onto that tour? That started months earlier. By late 1958, Holly was trapped. Not creatively. His songwriting had never been sharper. Not professionally. He just married, moved to New York, and was assembling a new band. But financially? Legally? He was suffocating. Norman Petty, his producer back in Clovis, New Mexico, controlled the masters to everything Holly had recorded with the Crickets. Every hit, every royalty check. Holly had left the band, left Petty, left Texas, trying to start clean. But starting clean costs money. Studio time, session musicians, rent in Greenwich Village while his wife was pregnant. The publishing royalties from Peggy Sue and That'll Be the Day? Still tangled up in legal disputes with Petty. So Holly took the tour. The winter dance party, 11 states in 3 weeks, broken buses in sub-zero weather, small-town ballrooms, anything to generate cash while he figured out his next move. The industry didn't care about his legal battles. They just needed Buddy Holly records. And then, on February 3rd, outside Clear Lake, Iowa, the need became a problem. The Beechcraft Bonanza went down 8 miles from the airport. Holly, Richie Valens, the Big Bopper, the 21-year-old pilot who shouldn't have been flying in those conditions. All dead by 1 a.m. By morning, radio stations knew. By midday, they were pulling Holly's records. Too painful, too soon, out of respect. But respect doesn't pay the bills. Within a week, Coral Records faced a crisis no one had prepared for. Buddy Holly was dead. But Buddy Holly, the commercial asset, the contract, the catalog, was very much alive, and very much in demand. Here's what they had. Singles, B-sides, a few tracks Holly had recorded in New York after leaving the Crickets, but no solo Buddy Holly album, nothing cohesive, nothing with his name alone on the cover. The Crickets albums belonged to a different label. Norman Petty still owned most of the masters. And Maria Elena Holly, 25 years old, pregnant and shattered, wasn't answering business calls. The fans wanted something. The radio stations needed content. The distributors expected product. And then someone at the label asked the question that changed everything. How much unreleased material do we have? They started pulling tapes. Session recordings Holly had done in New York without the Crickets. Tracks Petty still controlled from the Clovis days. Alternate takes. Demos. Songs that existed but had never been released because Holly was still deciding what to do with them. Raining in My Heart. Recorded just months before his death, strings and all. Early in the Morning. A song Holly wrote but gave to Bobby Darin. Now they were taking it back. Heartbeat. A track that felt prophetic in the worst possible way. Peggy Sue Got Married, a sequel to his biggest hit that he'd never finished promoting. None of it had been designed as an album. Holly hadn't picked the sequence. He hadn't written liner notes. He hadn't approved final mixes. But here's the thing. The label didn't need his approval anymore. They had the masters. They had the contract. And they had something more powerful than artistic intent. They had public grief. The meeting that assembled the track list took less than 3 hours, faster than most album planning sessions, because this wasn't about vision, it was about inventory management. Someone suggested they call it Buddy Holly. Simple, direct, impossible to misunderstand. Someone else asked, "Is this too soon?" The room went quiet. Then someone said what everyone was thinking. "If we wait, someone else will do it first." The album was announced in March 1959. Release date April 16th, 2 months and 13 days after the crash. Maria Elena Holly wasn't consulted. She was grieving in private, 7 months pregnant, unable to listen to her husband's voice without collapsing. Norman Petty provided masters, for a fee. Coral Records designed the cover. Buddy Holly, alive, smiling, wearing his signature glasses, a ghost in the record store bins. No one asked if it was appropriate. No one debated the ethics in writing. The machinery of the music industry doesn't stop for tragedy. It packages it. And here's what no executive said out loud but everyone understood. This album would sell because he was dead, not in spite of it. Posthumous records don't have to be good. They just have to exist. Fans don't buy them to discover new music. They buy them to hold on to something that's already gone. The album became a product of its moment. Not Buddy Holly's final statement, but the industry's first answer to a question no one wanted to ask. What do you do when your artist dies before their career does? You keep recording. April 16th, 1959. The album hits stores. The reviews are complicated. Billboard calls it a fitting tribute. Cashbox praises the production. But between the lines there's hesitation, discomfort. Some critics ask the quiet question, should this exist? Others avoid the question entirely and just review the songs. Raining in My Heart becomes an unintentional anthem. Fans hear it and break down in record stores. DJs play it and go silent for 5 seconds afterward, an eternity in radio. It doesn't matter anymore. The Paul Anka ballad Holly recorded in his final session takes on a meaning no one intended. The title alone feels like a punchline from the universe. The album doesn't explode up the charts. It's not That'll Be the Day all over again. But it does something quieter, stranger. It gives grief a product number. Fans who couldn't process Holly's death suddenly had a ritual. Buy the album, play it alone, cry, repeat. Radio stations that pulled his music out of respect started playing it again, not as nostalgia, as continuation. But here's what nobody admitted yet. Continuation of what? An artist's vision? Or a label's revenue stream? The answer would take years to untangle. And by then, the precedent was already set. The album sold well enough to prove a point. Posthumous releases work. And Norman Petty was paying attention. Over the next 3 years, Petty would release overdubbed versions of Holly's demos, adding strings, backup singers, full orchestration to bare-bones recordings Holly had never intended to finish. Some of it was tasteful, some of it was not. And because Holly wasn't alive to object, no one could say for certain which was which. Maria Elena Holly would spend decades fighting for control, challenging Petty's ownership, contesting the rights to her husband's image, pushing back against releases she believed distorted his intent. But the damage, if you could call it that, was done. Buddy Holly had become a catalog, a brand. A series of editorial decisions made by people who loved him, needed him, or profited from him. And the 1958 self-titled album was the beginning. Not because it was exploitative, it wasn't, not really. But because it established the template. An artist's death doesn't end their recording career. It just transfers ownership. It took the British invasion to change how people heard the album. In 1963, the Beatles appeared on television and told the world they named themselves after the Crickets, Buddy Holly's old band. Suddenly, teenagers who'd never heard of Holly were digging through record bins, finding the 1958 album, listening with fresh ears. And they heard something the grief-stricken fans of 1959 couldn't. This wasn't just a memorial, it was a document of artistic evolution. Raining in My Heart had lush orchestration. It Doesn't Matter Anymore used pizzicato strings in ways rock and roll hadn't attempted yet. Holly was experimenting, pushing past the cricket sound, writing about adult relationships, refusing to repeat himself. Critics who had dismissed the album as cobbled together started recognizing its accidental coherence. Bob Dylan, in interviews, would later point to Holly's fearlessness, how he'd risk string sections and ballads when rock and roll was supposed to stay raw. Paul McCartney would eventually buy the publishing rights to Holly's entire catalog, calling him the one who mattered most. The album hadn't changed, but what people heard in it had, not a tragedy. An interrupted conversation. The influence of Buddy Holly isn't in the songs, it's in the precedent. Every posthumous album that followed, Otis Redding's Sittin' On, The Dock of the Bay, Janis Joplin's Pearl, Jeff Buckley's Sketches for My Sweetheart the Drunk, walked the line this album established. How do you honor an artist's intent when they're not there to clarify it? Some estates handled it well, others didn't, but the template was set in 1959. Death doesn't end a recording career, it complicates it. And the Buddy Holly album became the case study for every ethical debate about posthumous music that would follow. Not because it was perfect, but because it was first. And first decisions echo longest. Buddy Holly's last recording session was October 21, 1958. By February 3, 1959, he was dead. By April 16th, an album with his name was in stores. He never heard the final mixes, never approved the track list, never wrote the liner notes or chose the cover photo. And yet, it's his album, his voice, his legacy. What the Buddy Holly album teaches us is this: art doesn't end when the artist does. It just becomes something else, a negotiation between who they were, who they might have become, and who the world decides they should be. Holly's music survived because it was strong enough to outlast exploitation, human enough to still sound alive 70 years later, real enough that even the uncomfortable parts, the speed, the commerce, the questions, couldn't diminish it. The album isn't perfect, but it's honest, a document of transition, a monument to potential, a reminder that some careers don't finish. They just stop, mid-sentence, and leave the rest of us to figure out what comes next. Buddy Holly died at 22. But the music, that's still here, and it still doesn't matter anymore.